From the earliest days of his life, the gentle light of love that enveloped the infant Muhammad came most purely and tenderly from the embrace of his mother, Aminah bint Wahb. Hers was a love shaped not only by the natural bond between a mother and her child, but also by an awareness, quiet yet profound, of the remarkable destiny that lay ahead for her son. In the stillness of the nights in Makkah, when the desert winds whispered ancient secrets through the narrow streets, Aminah would look upon her child's peaceful face, sensing that the journey of his life would stretch beyond the horizons known to any mother before her. Aminah herself had known sorrow early. She had married Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib, a noble and beloved young man of Quraysh, only to lose him before their child could be born. The grief of widowhood so soon after marriage weighed heavily on her heart, yet within her womb she carried a hope that gave her strength. When the time came to give birth, Aminah was not surrounded by the presence of her husband, but by her unyielding faith and a comforting sense that this child was protected by a divine promise. The night Muhammad was born was unlike any other. Aminah felt a calmness descend upon her, as if the air itself paused in reverence. Later, she would recall how a light emerged from her that seemed to reach far across the horizon, illuminating distant lands. It was a sign she kept quietly in her heart, a sacred knowing that her child was meant to bring light into a world shadowed by ignorance. In the days and nights that followed, Aminah devoted herself entirely to nurturing and caring for her son. Her love was not loud or boastful. It was the quiet, steady warmth that soothes a child and gives him courage to greet each new dawn. She would hold him close, gently whispering words of affection, and even in her own moments of sorrow, she found solace in the small, soft heartbeat that echoed against her chest. Aminah watched her son grow, marveling at his calm and thoughtful nature. Though still an infant, there was an uncommon serenity in his gaze, as though his eyes reflected not only what was before him, but also truths far beyond what others could see. Mothers in Makkah would often speak of how beautiful the child of Aminah was, and she, though touched by these words, carried in her heart a love that no praise could ever deepen nor lessen. In accordance with the custom of Quraysh, young Muhammad was entrusted to a wet nurse, Halima al-Sa'diya, to be raised in the clean air of the desert. Aminah's heart ached at this separation, yet she accepted it as part of ensuring her child's strength and health. When Halima returned him years later, Aminah embraced him with tears that spoke of the silent endurance of a mother's love. The time apart had only strengthened her bond with her son. Her longing had deepened her appreciation for every smile and word that passed between them. Aminah never remarried, dedicating her life entirely to her child. She found joy in the small moments, in the way Muhammad would sit by her side, listening quietly as she spoke of his noble father whom he never met, in his gentle questions that showed a depth of thought rare in one so young, and in the way he treated all around him with kindness and respect that reflected the lessons she had so carefully nurtured in his heart. When Muhammad was about 6 years old, Aminah decided to take him to Yathrib, later known as Med, to visit the grave of his father and introduce him to his extended family. It was a journey filled with emotion, a widow bringing her only child to see the resting place of the husband she had loved so briefly, yet so deeply. Along the way, Aminah shared stories of Abdullah's character, his generosity, and the love that had blossomed between them. In Yathrib, they stayed with their relatives for about a month. Those days must have been bittersweet for Aminah, seeing her son among the family of his late father, knowing he would never know his father's embrace, and feeling the weight of memories only she carried. Yet she watched with quiet pride as young Muhammad moved gently among his kin, his presence marked by the same dignity that had been spoken of his father. As the time came to return to Makkah, Aminah and her small caravan set out once more across the vast, unforgiving desert. Somewhere near Al-Abwa, a small village between Makkah and Medina, Aminah fell ill. The illness came swiftly, leaving her weak and drained. Alone, except for her beloved son and her servant, Baraka, known as Aminah, Aminah realized that her time was nearing its end. In those final moments, Aminah's heart must have been heavy with sorrow, knowing she would leave behind her precious child who had already been born an orphan of his father. Yet her faith never wavered. She must have looked into the eyes of young Muhammad, whispering words of love and blessing, hoping he would remember the warmth of her embrace even when she could no longer be by his side. For the young child, barely 6 years old, it was a moment of profound loss that would echo through his life. He was to become the orphan of both father and mother. Yet those brief years under Aminah's care would forever remain a source of tenderness and strength within him. Aminah's passing at Al-Abwa marked the end of a short yet deeply meaningful chapter. She was buried in that lonely place, and her child returned to Makkah under the care of his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, and later his uncle, Abu Talib. But Aminah's love lived on in him, in his gentle nature, his patience, his kindness toward the weak and the forgotten, and his deep respect for women and mothers in particular. Even in later years, when revelation came to him and he bore the immense weight of prophethood, those who observed Muhammad would note the deep well of compassion that seemed to define him. It was as though the memory of his mother's love continued to flow through his words and actions, shaping the mercy and gentleness for which he became renowned. Many years later, as an adult, the Prophet returned to Al-Abwa standing by his mother's grave. He wept, a rare moment when the strength of his heart yielded to the tender sorrow of remembering the mother whose love had been his first comfort in life. Those tears were not only for the loss he had suffered but also for the remembrance of the love that had shaped him in those earliest, most vulnerable years. Aminah's story is often told briefly in books, a few lines noting her as the mother of the Prophet and her passing during his childhood. Yet behind those brief lines lies a world of silent devotion, of hope and heartbreak, of faith in the unseen plan of Allah, and of a mother's endless love that transcended the boundaries of life and death. In every prayer, every act of kindness, every word of compassion that the Prophet shared with the world, there is an echo of Aminah's love, a love that, though it lasted only a few years in this world, helped shape a mercy sent for all the world's. In the quiet that followed Aminah's passing, the young Muhammad carried forward, not just the grief of loss, but the unseen treasures of his mother's teachings. Though she had been with him for only a few short years, those years were filled with moments of tenderness, of whispered stories about his noble lineage, and of gentle reminders to hold fast to honesty, mercy, and kindness. Aminah, with her soft voice and gentle hands, had sown seeds in his heart that would one day blossom into the message of mercy for all mankind. Barakah, the faithful servant who had been by Aminah's side since before the Prophet's birth, became like a second mother to him. Yet even Barakah knew that no love could replace that of Aminah. She would speak to him of his mother's gentleness, recounting stories of how she would watch him sleep, softly reciting prayers for his protection, and how her eyes would fill with hope and sorrow at the same time, hope for his future and sorrow for the father he had never met. As he grew, Muhammad often walked the same paths he had once traveled with his mother. Each stone and each stretch of sand held memories, silent witnesses to a bond that death had not fully severed. Though still a child, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that seemed to reflect both his noble blood and the deep love he had known in Aminah's arms. Those who saw him noted something extraordinary, a child touched by sorrow, yet not crushed by it, a child whose eyes held a depth and kindness far beyond his years. The years that followed brought more loss, as his grandfather Abdul, who had loved him dearly, also passed away, leaving Muhammad once again facing the cold winds of orphanhood. Yet even then, he never became bitter. The warmth he had known from his mother seemed to remain like a light within, guiding him through grief with a grace that few could understand. The memories of Aminah lived not only in his heart, but also in the quiet values she had given him. From her, he learned compassion, a compassion that would later move him to weep for the suffering of others, to stand beside the poor, to protect the rights of the weak and voiceless. Her stories about his father's honor and the virtues of their ancestors instilled in him a deep respect for truth and justice. In her brief but precious time with him, Aminah had planted the roots of the very qualities that would define the Prophet. As Muhammad entered adulthood, those around him called him Al-Amin, the trustworthy. They saw in him not just honesty in trade and speech, but a sincerity and humility that made hearts incline toward him. Few understood that these qualities had been shaped in part by a mother's love that, though short-lived in years, had left an indelible mark on his soul. His mission was unlike any before him, to call a society sunk in tribal pride, injustice, and idolatry to the worship of the one God, to transform hearts hardened by centuries of custom and rivalry into hearts softened by faith. This task required not just courage but extraordinary gentleness and patience, qualities first sown in the soil of a mother's tenderness. In the earliest days of his prophethood, when few believed and many mocked, the Prophet endured. With quiet strength, the love and trust Aminah had nurtured in him became a wellspring of resilience. He faced insults not with anger, but with prayer. He responded to cruelty with compassion. Even his fiercest opponents could not call him a liar. So well known was his character, the same character Aminah had cultivated with soft words and watchful care. As more people embraced Islam, the Prophet built a community whose foundations rested on mercy, equality, and love, principles that seemed to flow naturally from his own heart. He taught that faith is not merely words upon the tongue, but actions rooted in compassion, feeding the hungry, caring for the sick, comforting the grieving. These were not abstract ideals. They were the living practice of a man shaped from childhood to see the world through the lens of kindness. The Prophet's tenderness extended to every part of life. He was known to shorten his prayers when he heard a child crying behind him, understanding a mother's anxiety. He would stand in respect when his daughter Fatima entered the room, kiss her on the forehead, and seat her beside him. These gestures were more than mere customs. They were windows into a heart softened by the memory of his own mother's affection. In the Quran, Allah commanded him to lower your wing of mercy for your parents, and though Aminah had passed when he was a child, the Prophet fulfilled this through remembrance and prayer. At her grave, his tears were not of weakness, but of a love so deep it defied the decades that separated them. Even in the way he guided his followers, the Prophet's style reflected maternal gentleness. He corrected mistakes with kindness, taught through patient repetition, and forgave readily. The companions who knew him best described him as more merciful to the believers than themselves, a mercy rooted in divine revelation and nurtured. In the cradle of Aminah's care, the Prophet's entire message, while vast and comprehensive, can be traced in part to a simple truth learned early, that love can heal what the world breaks, and that mercy can soften even the hardest of hearts. This truth, so central to Islam, began in a mother's embrace. After the Hijrah to Medina, the Prophet established a society unlike any other, where brotherhood transcended tribal ties, and the weak were protected rather than exploited. His insistence on justice, even against the powerful, and kindness, even to enemies, revealed a heart trained to see every person's humanity. Though the hardships of his mission were many, the gentleness instilled by Aminah's love remained unshaken. In his final years, as revelation neared completion and the faith spread far beyond Arabia, the Prophet's heart remained as humble as when he was a boy. Power did not change him. Fame did not harden him. In public and private, his compassion shone brightest, especially toward those society overlooked, the poor, orphans, widows, and slaves. His words and deeds taught that greatness lies not in wealth or lineage alone, but in the depth of mercy one extends to others. As his life drew to a close, the Prophet continued to speak of kindness to mothers, reminding his followers again and again of their unmatched status. Paradise lies at the feet of your mother. He taught words that echoed the silent legacy of Aminah, whose brief years of love had left an imprint that even time could not erase. When Muslims around the world recite blessings upon the Prophet, they also, in a way, honor the woman who brought him into this world. Though history preserves few details of Aminah's life, her impact lives on in the millions who follow her son's teachings. Every act of charity inspired by his words, every prayer whispered in love and hope, carries a trace of the compassion she nurtured. Aminah's story holds powerful lessons for all. It teaches that true influence is not measured by years or wealth but by sincerity and love. Her life was short, her circumstances marked by sorrow, yet what she gave her son became part of a message that transformed the world. For parents, her story is a reminder of the weight and beauty of nurturing a child's heart, that the seeds planted in early years may grow into a tree whose shade comforts generations. For those who feel their efforts unseen, Aminah's legacy whispers that love given quietly, with faith, is never truly lost. And for those who face hardship, her story and her son's life together show that loss, though painful, can become a source of strength. The Prophet did not become bitter in his grief. Instead, his compassion deepened. The orphan of Makkah became the mercy to the worlds, and in that mercy lived the silent prayer of a mother long gone from this world. In remembering Aminah, believers are reminded of the profound humanity of the Prophet. Before he was a messenger, he was a son, a child, who loved, lost, and carried that love forward as part of his mission. His tears at her grave remind us that faith does not demand the absence of sorrow. It teaches us to transform sorrow into compassion. As the centuries roll on, the desert roads between Makkah and Medina still hold the memory of Aminah's final journey, a mother traveling with her child, unaware that her brief life would shape the destiny of nations. The lonely grave at Al-Abwa stands not as a sign of forgotten history, but as a quiet monument to the unseen power of a mother's love. In every masjid where her son's name is honored, in every prayer whispered by those who follow him, Aminah's gift to the world endures. She gave the world not only a child but a prophet whose heart was large enough to embrace all of humanity. Through him, her love became universal. It taught that faith must manifest in kindness, that strength is found in mercy, and that true greatness begins in the humble embrace of a mother. Aminah bint Wahb passed from this world on a quiet stretch of desert road, her life seemingly small in the grand sweep of history. Yet her love lives on, not just in the memory of her son, but in every act of compassion and mercy that flows from his example. And so, the story of Aminah's love and passing is not an ending, but a beginning, a chapter whose words continue to be written in the hearts and actions of those who seek to follow her son. Her life, though brief, teaches us that the most powerful legacies are built not of monuments and titles, but of love, faith, and kindness planted in a single heart, a heart that, by Allah's will, changed the world. Even as time drifts ever forward, the memory of Aminah's gentle love remains suspended between history and faith, a love that quietly prepared a heart to carry the heaviest of burdens and the most universal of messages. Her story is a reminder that even the briefest chapters in life can hold meaning that echoes through centuries, shaping not just one life but the destiny of countless others. Though the world may remember her mainly as the mother of the Prophet, to him, she was the first teacher, the first comforter, and the first home his heart ever knew. Her soft prayers over him as an infant, her gentle words about his noble father, and her unwavering trust in Allah during hardship planted seeds of compassion that blossomed into the Prophet's own mercy to all creation. In his life, we see the reflection of what she once offered in those quiet nights and sunlit days of childhood, kindness, patience, faith, and hope. And through him, those gifts became a mercy for the worlds, the living fulfillment of a mother's love that transcended even her early passing. Her grave at Al-Abwa may lie silent, but her legacy lives in every whispered prayer, every act of kindness, every tear of compassion, inspired by her son's teachings. Aminah's love became part of the very heart of Islam, reminding believers that strength is found in mercy, and that the deepest faith often begins with a mother's prayerful embrace. In moments when he was alone, after the day's burdens were set aside, perhaps the Prophet would remember Aminah's face, her tired eyes filled with hope, her gentle voice telling him of his noble father, her love that wrapped around him, like a soft cloak against the world's coldness. Though the years had carried him far from those moments, they had not dulled their warmth. Through him, Aminah's love reached beyond her own child. It became part of a message that spread across the desert sands, across seas and mountains, to every corner of the world. Her love became part of a faith that commands believers to honor mothers, to cherish them, to treat them with kindness that knows no limits. Centuries later, her story still moves hearts. The details of her life may seem few, her years too short, yet the greatness of her influence lies not in length of days, but in depth of love. She is remembered not only as the mother of the Prophet, but as the first heart to shelter him, the first voice to soothe him, the first teacher of compassion. Life teaches us that love, when given with sincerity and faith, does not fade with death. It lives on in the hearts it touched, shapes character, and echoes through generations. Her story is a reminder that what we pour into the hearts of our children, our kindness, our faith, our prayers, may bear fruit far beyond what we can see. The Prophet's entire mission, rooted in mercy, compassion, and justice, was shaped partly by the woman who brought him into this world and loved him in the brief years they shared. Even in parting, her love was a gift that helped prepare him for the path ahead, a path that would change the course of history. Absolutely. Let's continue, carrying this story forward into deeper reflection on Aminah's enduring influence, the Prophet's lifelong connection to her, and how her brief life echoed across history, hearts, and faith. As years passed and the Prophet's mission unfolded, the seeds planted by Aminah blossomed in countless ways, visible not only in grand moments but in small acts of everyday life that revealed the depth of his compassion. He did not simply preach mercy, he lived it. Those who met him often spoke first of his gentle eyes, his soft voice, and the way he listened fully to each person as though they were the only soul in the world. This attentiveness, this capacity to see the dignity of every human being, was an inheritance rooted in the tenderness he had once known at his mother's side. Though the records of Aminah's own words and life are few, the traces of her character shine through the Prophet himself. In his fairness in trade as a young man, in his refusal to mock or belittle anyone, and in the way he spoke to children with patience and respect, one sees glimpses of the lessons she must have quietly taught him. Even as a mother facing widowhood, Aminah had upheld grace, and in her short life, she showed her child that dignity need not depend on wealth or power, but rests in the heart. After prophethood, when the trials became heavy, the rejection by his own tribe, the insults, the threats, and finally, open hostility, the Prophet's response remained remarkably free of hatred. He would pray for those who harmed him, asking Allah to guide them, not destroy them. In moments when anger might have been justified, he chose mercy. Though revelation and divine guidance shaped him, the heart that received that guidance had first been softened by a mother's love. It is telling that the Quran so often commands believers to show kindness to parents, and especially to mothers. Your Lord has decreed that you worship none but Him, and that you be kind to parents. Quran jam 17:23. This command, coming from Allah, was perfectly embodied in the life of His messenger. Even long after Aminah's passing, the Prophet remembered her with tenderness that never faded. In another journey, when the Prophet passed by his mother's grave, he stopped, sat beside it, and wept until those around him wept as well. His tears were not of despair, but of love that remained alive, despite decades apart. In that moment, his companions witnessed the depth of the bond between mother and child, a bond that even prophethood and the passage of time could not erase. The tenderness the Prophet displayed toward women in his community also reflected this early influence. He uplifted the status of women in a society that often dismissed them. He taught that daughters were a blessing, that mothers were to be honored beyond all others, and that paradise lay at a mother's feet. It is difficult not to see in this revolutionary message the living memory of the woman who first loved and protected him. Aminah's passing, though heartbreaking, became a silent part of the divine plan. The orphan child, bereft of both parents, grew up relying not on earthly bonds but on Allah. Yet the memory of his mother remained like a tender whisper, reminding him always of gentleness, humility, and love. In this way, her influence blended with revelation, guiding him to become the mercy to the worlds. Throughout his life, the Prophet's treatment of orphans bore the unmistakable mark of his own experience. He taught, "I and the one who cares for an orphan will be in paradise like this, and held up 2 fingers joined together. His kindness to orphans was not distant charity, but a deeply personal empathy, born from knowing the loneliness of losing a parent. In his dealings with family, friends, and even strangers, the Prophet never allowed power or fame to overshadow his character. He visited the sick, consoled the grieving, smiled at children, and showed patience with those who tested his limits. Each of these small acts was a ripple of the love first given to him by Aminah, love that taught him the strength of gentleness and the power of mercy. Even in the grandest moments, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, the conquest of Makkah, the farewell pilgrimage, the Prophet moved not with pride but with humility. When he entered Makkah as its victor, his head was bowed so low that his beard almost touched his camel's saddle. In that moment of triumph, there was no arrogance, only gratitude and compassion. The child who had once traveled these roads, with his mother now returned, guided by revelation and shaped by the memory of her love. Though Aminah never witnessed her son's prophethood, her unseen presence lived on in his heart. In quiet nights, when he stood in prayer until his feet swelled, his connection to Allah was pure and intimate, a closeness nurtured first by the love of a mother who had taught him trust and hope. When the Prophet spoke of the importance of family ties, of honoring parents, and of showing love and kindness, it was not theory but lived truth. His own life was proof that early love leaves an imprint deeper than words alone. Even brief moments of tenderness can give strength that lasts a lifetime. The story of Aminah's love also holds lessons for every parent and caregiver. It teaches that time, though precious, is not the only measure of impact. A few years filled with sincerity, faith, and kindness can shape a heart more powerfully than many years without them. Aminah's years with her son were few, but they were rich in love, prayer, and hope. And through him, her love reached far beyond what she could have imagined. Her story reminds us of the quiet power of mothers, often unseen by the world, yet central to shaping it. Behind every person of greatness stands the silent work of those who loved, nurtured, and prayed for them. In the case of the Prophet Muhammad, the first of these was Aminah, whose love, though history records it in only a few lines, changed the world. As Muslims remember the Prophet, they also remember the sacrifices of his family, the father who died before his birth, the grandfather and uncle who sheltered him, and at the heart of it all, the mother whose brief life left a timeless legacy. Aminah's love became part of a message that transcended time and place, a message of mercy, compassion, and hope for all humanity. Centuries have passed, empires have risen and fallen, but the tenderness of that mother's love still moves hearts today. It lives in the prayers of believers who remember her son, in the tears shed at the thought of his hardships, and in every act of kindness inspired by his example. In this way, Aminah's story is not merely a historical account, but an ongoing testament to the power of love rooted in faith. Her life teaches that what matters most is not how long we have, but how we fill the time we are given with sincerity, compassion, and trust in Allah's plan. Her passing on the road between Makkah and Medina was not the end of her story. It was, in a sense, the beginning of a story that would unfold through her son, a story of hope, triumphing over despair, mercy, overcoming hatred, and faith shining through darkness. And so, in the heart of the orphan boy who became a prophet, Aminah's love continued to beat, a gentle, enduring reminder that even the shortest life, lived with faith and love, can change the destiny of the world. As the years passed and the Prophet grew into his role as the messenger of Allah, the echo of his mother's love was never far from his heart, even as revelation descended upon him in the cave of Hira. As he trembled from the weight of divine words, one wonders whether somewhere in his heart there stirred the memory of Aminah's reassuring embrace. Though gone from this world, the warmth of her love had prepared him for moments of fear and doubt, teaching him that even in solitude, he was never truly alone. Throughout his life, moments arose when the memory of Aminah would surface powerfully. Once, during his return journey from a battle, the Prophet passed by Al-Abwa and visited his mother's grave. Those who were with him saw him weep, with such tenderness and grief that they too were moved to tears. It was as though, in that moment, the strength of the Prophet's heart gave way to the sorrow of a child who had loved and lost, reminding everyone that even the strongest of men carries within him the gentle ache of a mother's absence. Yet his tears were never of bitterness. They were of love remembered and honored. Even in grief, the Prophet taught his companions about compassion and loyalty, that love does not end with death, and that remembering those who nurtured us is a sign of faith and gratitude. In later years, the Prophet would speak of mothers in a way that revealed the depth of his own experience. When asked who among people most deserved good treatment, he replied, "Your mother," and again, "Your mother," and once more, "Your mother," before finally saying, "Then your father." In these words, the world glimpsed the profound respect and love he held for the role of mothers, a reflection of the love he had known from Aminah. Brief, though it had been, Aminah's influence reached beyond the private circle of her family. Through her son, her values spread to all corners of the world. The compassion she had shown him as a child became the mercy with which he treated enemies who had wronged him. The kindness she had embodied became the reason he would rise at night to pray for those who rejected him. The love she had instilled in his heart became the fountain from which his message of love and forgiveness flowed. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between the weighty tasks of prophethood, it is easy to imagine the prophet remembering his mother, her gentle smile, her soft words, the way she had held him close as they traveled to Yeth. Perhaps, when he saw mothers comforting their children, he was reminded of Aminah and felt again the warmth of her embrace. The tenderness that so defined his character had roots in those early years by her side. The loss of Aminah also shaped, in him, a profound empathy for orphans. In the Quran, one finds repeated verses urging kindness toward the orphan, reminding believers not to wrong them, not to turn them away. It is as though Allah, in his wisdom, turned the prophet's own sorrow into a source of endless compassion for others. The pain of losing a mother at such a young age became, in the prophet, a mercy for all the orphans of the world. Many centuries have passed, yet the story of Aminah's love continues to inspire. It reminds us that even a short life can leave a lasting impact when it is filled with love and faith. Though she did not live to see her son's mission, Aminah played a role no one else could, shaping the heart of the one who would change history. The love between a mother and child is among the most powerful forces in the world. In the case of Aminah and Muhammad, it became part of a divine plan. Her love prepared him to bear the burdens of prophethood with patience and kindness, to face persecution with forgiveness, and to guide humanity with a heart softened by loss yet strengthened by faith. Her passing was a moment of deep sorrow, yet it was also a turning point. The orphan child, left without mother or father, grew into a man whose reliance was solely upon Allah, whose compassion embraced all people, and whose memory of a mother's gentle love remained an unseen strength throughout his life. In the years that followed Aminah's passing, the world around young Muhammad shifted in ways large and small, yet the imprint of her love remained steadfast within him, a quiet pulse of warmth in even the coldest moments. Though his time with her had been brief, its echoes would resound through every stage of his life. For some, the loss of both parents at such a young age might harden the heart. Yet for Muhammad, it seemed to deepen his gentleness, rooting it so firmly within that no hardship could erase it. Under the care of his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, Muhammad found protection and guidance. Abdul Muttalib recognized in his grandson something special, a dignity beyond his years, a calm attentiveness, and a quiet strength. At times, the grandfather would look upon the boy sitting near the Kaaba, thoughtful and composed, and feel the weight of destiny around him. Perhaps in those moments, the memory of Aminah was also alive in the grandfather's heart, the daughter-in-law whose life had been marked by love, loss, and unwavering faith. After the death of Abdul Muttalib, Muhammad came under the guardianship of his uncle, Abu Talib. Though Abu Talib struggled financially, his love for Muhammad was steadfast and protective. In the heart of the young orphan, the lessons of compassion and dignity that had begun with Aminah continued to grow. The prophet's later years would show how deeply those values had taken root. He would carry himself with humility despite fame, meet hatred, with patience, and extend mercy where others might seek revenge. Yet amid these external lessons and guidance, there was an inner light, a foundation built in the gentle embrace of his mother. Though her voice had long fallen silent, its message still spoke in his conscience. The memory of her kindness shaped the way he spoke to the poor and the downtrodden. The memory of her loving gaze became a shield against arrogance. The memory of her sorrow at being widowed helped him understand the silent grief of others. As a young man, Muhammad earned a reputation for trustworthiness and truthfulness. People called him Al-Amin, the trustworthy. This reputation was no accident. It reflected the values instilled in him first by Aminah, whose own life had been defined by dignity and quiet strength. Even those who later opposed his message could not deny his character. His honesty stood beyond question. In the years before revelation, as Muhammad spent time in contemplation within the cave of Hira, one might imagine how the silence of the desert nights brought memories of his mother closer. In the solitude of the cave, far from the noise of Makkah, the prophet was alone, yet not truly alone. The love he had known, the losses he had endured, and the truths quietly taught to him in childhood kept him company. His mother's faith that her child was special, that he had a purpose beyond what the world yet understood, became part of the spiritual armor he would wear into his mission. Then came the day when revelation began, and with it, an entirely new chapter. The burden was immense, to stand against falsehood, to call people to truth, to endure mockery, threats, and violence. And through it all, the prophet's character remained remarkably gentle. His love for humanity, even those who rejected him, astonished friend and foe alike. This love was not born in a moment but shaped over years, starting with the quiet, unwavering affection of Aminah. Throughout the years of persecution in Mecca, the prophet never turned away the weak or the poor. In every act of kindness, feeding the hungry, comforting the bereaved, Forgiving the oppressors, one finds traces of a heart molded by sorrow and compassion. The memory of his mother, a widow who had known grief and hardship, must have deepened his empathy for the vulnerable. It made him a man whose love was not reserved only for those who loved him, but extended even to strangers and enemies. When the Prophet finally migrated to Medina, the city where he had once traveled with Aminah as a child, the echoes of that earlier journey must have returned to him. The roads he now walked as a leader had once been walked as a small boy holding his mother's hand. The contrast between then and now was stark. Then, he was a child wrapped in a mother's protection. Now, he was the messenger of God, carrying the weight of guiding an entire community. Yet within his heart, the memory of Aminah was surely present. Her gentle words, her prayers, her loving gaze. The Prophet established a community, built on compassion, justice, and mercy, principles that had first taken root in the soil of a mother's love. He taught his companions to be merciful, reminding them again and again that Allah is the most merciful, and that believers must reflect that mercy. He taught that strength lies not in anger but in forgiveness, that dignity comes not from pride but from humility, lessons that had been lived for him by Aminah before they were ever spoken aloud. In family life, too, the Prophet showed the influence of his mother's love. He treated his wives with kindness and respect, played with his children and grandchildren, and spoke with tenderness about the bonds of family. He wept openly at the grave of his mother, reminding his followers that love and sorrow are not signs of weakness but signs of a merciful heart. Even after the conquest of Makkah, when the Prophet returned as a victorious leader, he did not forget his roots. His triumph did not harden his heart. Instead, he forgave those who had wronged him, showing a level of mercy that astonished his former enemies. This capacity to forgive, to love despite hurt, can be traced back in part to the love he had received in childhood, and the pain of losing it so early. The Quran itself echoes themes of compassion and kindness, often mentioning the rights of orphans, and the poor. For a man who had been an orphan, these commands were not abstract rules, but living truths rooted in personal experience. When the Quran reminds believers, "Did he not find you an orphan and give you shelter?" Quran 93:6. It speaks to that intimate history, a history that began in the arms of Aminah bint Wahb,